Jim Carrey just told a courtroom he was filmed taking a bath with Puff Diddy without his consent. In a jaw-dropping moment that has sent shockwaves through the entertainment world, actor Jim Carrey took the stand today and dropped a bombshell. He claims Sean Diddy Combs secretly filmed the two of them in a bath together, using the footage as blackmail insurance. According to Carrey, it wasn't just a bizarre Hollywood moment, it was a calculated move to control him. They told me it was for protection, he said. But it wasn't mine they were protecting. This revelation comes amid Diddy's explosive federal trial, where he stands accused of human trafficking, coercion, and racketeering. And Carrey isn't the only star coming forward. The courtroom is becoming a parade of A-listers, dark secrets, and hidden footage no one was ever supposed to talk about until now. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. For decades, Jim Carrey was the embodiment of unfiltered joy and untamed comedic brilliance. From Ace Ventura to The Truman Show, his rise in Hollywood was not just meteoric, it was mythic. With his elastic face, limitless energy, and razor-sharp wit, he seemed to defy the rules of stardom. But behind that slapstick genius, behind the red carpet smiles and blockbuster successes, something darker was brewing, a shadow he never publicly acknowledged. Until now. In a packed federal courtroom, with media cameras locked out but the world watching in anticipation, Carrey sat on the witness stand, looked the judge dead in the eye, and dropped a bombshell that instantaneously shattered decades of carefully constructed celebrity illusion. His voice didn't tremble. His words didn't stumble. They struck with precision. "Yes, I took a bath with Puff Diddy," he said. As the prosecution team went silent, the defense scrambled, and spectators gasped audibly. For a moment, there was a strange stillness, like the courtroom itself had to catch its breath. Then the murmurs began. Court stenographers paused in disbelief, attorneys exchanged alarmed glances, and observers tweeted frantically from their seats. The revelation was more than sensational, it was seismic. No one expected Carrey, of all people, to be the key that could blow open the prosecution's case against Sean Diddy Combs, a man currently fighting charges of trafficking, coercion, racketeering, and years of criminal conspiracy tied to his entertainment empire. The world had already been riveted by the trial, which some legal analysts began calling the most explosive since O.J. Simpson. Diddy, the rap mogul once hailed as an industry titan and cultural pioneer, found himself facing accusations that sounded more like the plot of a Hollywood thriller than reality. Underground parties involving high-profile celebrities, secret recordings, coerced silence, and an empire built on fear and manipulation. But with Carrey's shocking testimony, the trial veered into territory that no one, not even the prosecution, was fully prepared for. This wasn't just about crimes committed. It was about complicity, about what people were willing to do to gain fame, about the unspoken rituals of Hollywood initiation. Carrey didn't merely name-drop Diddy or accuse him of misconduct. He admitted that he himself had participated in something so strange, so intimate, so outside the norm, that the very absurdity of the act raised deeper questions. Why would a young, rising comedian like Carrey find himself naked in a bathtub with one of the hop's most powerful moguls? He told the court it wasn't about friendship. It wasn't about drugs. It wasn't even about curiosity. It was about control, he said. It was about proving that you could be bought, bent, and made to behave. There was no contract, no camera crew, no audience. But in Carrey's testimony, there was something else. A suggestion that the bath wasn't just a symbolic act, but a documented one. That somewhere, somehow, this bizarre event was captured on film, not for posterity, but for power, to be used later, as leverage, as insurance. If that was true, it didn't just implicate Carrey. It changed the entire nature of Diddy's trial. Because now, prosecutors had evidence not only of trafficking and abuse of women, but a pattern, an ecosystem, of manipulation that targeted men, too. Famous ones with careers, wealth, and influence. And if Jim Carrey was the first to come forward, it begged the question, who else was involved? Who else had been filmed, coerced, blackmailed, or worse? The media responded with a frenzy unseen since the early days of the Harvey Weinstein revelations. Talk shows scrambled for expert guests. Podcasts shifted their programming overnight. Social media exploded with hashtags. Hashtag Carrey Speaks. Hashtag Diddy Bathgate. Hashtag Hollywood Secrets. Some mocked. Others defended. But everyone wanted to know, was this just a desperate bid for relevance by a fading star, or the tip of a criminal iceberg? What made it even more chilling was the deliberate, detailed way CAREY recounted the incident. He didn't flinch. He didn't laugh. He spoke as if he were finally exorcising something he had buried for decades. He said he had been warned. "You don't talk about what happens with Puff," he quoted a senior executive saying back in the early 90s. "Not if you want to work again." For years, he stayed quiet. But now, under oath and in front of federal prosecutors, he chose to speak. And in doing so, he may have opened a door that countless others have feared to even knock on. To understand the magnitude of what unfolded in that courtroom, we must go back. Back to the genesis of Diddy's empire. Back to the rise of Bad Boy Records, the era of Biggie Smalls, the glamour and violence that followed the East Coast-West Coast rap wars. We must revisit the mysterious deaths, the whispers of secret parties, and the countless lawsuits settled quietly behind closed doors. Over time, the industry moved on, or pretended to, but the pattern never really changed. The parties remained. The silence deepened. The bodies piled up, figuratively, and, in some cases, literally. The prosecution's case had already outlined a vast network of enablers, assistants, bodyguards, publicists, and even law enforcement officers on Diddy's payroll. But what it lacked was a famous face, a name the public knew, a voice that couldn't be dismissed. Until CAREY. What compelled him to speak now? According to sources close to the trial, CAREY had been approached months earlier by investigators after a former party planner mentioned him by name. Initially, he declined to cooperate. Then, after watching media coverage of Diddy's alleged abuse victims, most of them women, he reportedly reached out to the lead prosecutor with a message, "You don't know the half of it." CAREY's decision wasn't without consequence. His management team reportedly urged him to reconsider. Studios began quietly backing away from ongoing deals. Even some fellow comedians warned him that he was tarnishing the legacy. But CAREY, who in recent years has become more philosophical and reclusive, apparently didn't care. In court, he said, "If I lose everything, I'll still have peace. Because this thing has eaten me alive for years." That moment, raw and haunting, became an inflection point not only in the trial, but in the larger conversation around fame, power, and exploitation. It raised a terrifying possibility that even people we laugh with, people who bring us joy, have suffered in silence to maintain the illusion of success. In the weeks ahead, we will witness more testimony. More secrets will be spilled. More reputations may be shattered. But what Jim CAREY has already done, what he did in just one afternoon of truth-telling, will reverberate through Hollywood for years. He wasn't just testifying against Diddy. He was testifying against a system, one that rewards silence, punishes honesty, and thrives on control. This is the story of that testimony. The bath, the tape, the blackmail, and the empire that may finally fall because of it. The courtroom doors creaked open at precisely 8:45 a.m., and the air inside was already thick with anticipation. Reporters clutched their notepads and adjusted their earpieces. The gallery was packed, filled with legal observers, off-duty celebrities hidden behind oversized sunglasses, and members of the public who had waited in line since dawn to witness what had now been dubbed the testimony that could collapse the castle. Jim CAREY entered through a side door flanked by two federal marshals. He looked thinner than usual, his usually buoyant demeanor replaced by a grave, composed energy. Dressed in a dark, collarless jacket and black slacks, he didn't flash a smile, didn't wave to the gallery, didn't glance at the cameras that weren't even allowed inside. He went straight to the witness stand and took his seat, crossing one leg over the other with deliberate stillness. Judge Elaine Harper, a seasoned and notoriously sharp federal judge with 30 years on the bench, called the court to order. "Mr. CAREY," she said, addressing him directly, "you understand that you are under oath, and that any false statements made in this court will be subject to perjury charges?" "I do," CAREY replied, his voice flat, stripped of all its usual theatricality. It was a surreal moment. Jim CAREY, the man who once leaped on a talk show sofas and twisted his face into 100 different expressions on cue, now sat solemn and still, preparing to recount an experience so intimate and so strange that it bordered on the unreal. But nothing about what he said next was delivered for effect. There was no punchline, only unvarnished truth. The prosecution began. Mr. Carey, Assistant U.S. Attorney Dana Velasquez said, "Can you please tell the court how you came to know Sean Combs?" Carey paused, breathing in through his nose. "I met Sean at a party in Los Angeles, sometime in the early 90s. I had just come off the success of In Living Color. He wasn't as big as he would become yet, but people in the industry were already whispering his name like he was the second coming." "What kind of party was this?" Velasquez asked. Carey looked toward the judge briefly, then back to the prosecutor. "It was marketed as a celebration for up-and-comers, movers and shakers. But there was an understanding, unspoken, but real, that the party wasn't just about celebration. It was about initiation." The room was silent. Velasquez didn't interrupt. She allowed Carey's words to hang in the air before prompting again. "What happened at the party?" "There were a lot of rooms," Carey began. "Each room had a different vibe. Some were just music and drinks. Others were quieter, darker. There were security guards in the halls, watching, but they weren't stopping anything. If anything, they were guiding, directing people to certain places." "And who invited you?" Carey sighed. "A producer I was working with on a sketch show. He said it would be good for me to network with the real decision-makers." That's the phrase he used. The real decision-makers. "He introduced me to Diddy that night." Velasquez leaned in slightly. "What was your first impression of Mr. Combs?" "Charismatic. That was my first impression. He had presence. When he walked into a room, everything stopped. He didn't talk much. He didn't need to. People hovered around him like satellites. And if you were brought into his orbit, you felt like you were being chosen." "And were you?" Carey nodded slowly. "Yes. Not right away, but later that night, one of his assistants came to me and said Mr. Combs wanted to speak with me in private. He said it was an opportunity." Velasquez continued. "And did you go?" "I did," Carey admitted. "I was young, hungry. I wanted to move past sketch comedy. I wanted to headline films. I went because I thought he could help make that happen." "What happened next, Mr. Carey?" Carey's fingers tightened around the armrest of the witness box. He was in a room with a huge bathtub in the center. Not a normal bathroom. It was more like a set. Lights, curtains, dim ambience. He was already in the tub. Alone. He told me to come in. Said he liked to talk business where things are honest. Those were his words. Velasquez glanced briefly at the jury, who were now visibly riveted. "Did you get in the tub?" "Yes," Carey said. Reluctantly. "I didn't understand it. I kept trying to think. Maybe it was some sort of metaphor. Maybe he just had strange habits. But when I got in, I realized it wasn't about comfort. It was about power." "Did anything sexual happen?" "No," Carey replied quickly. "Nothing like that. But it was invasive in another way. He asked personal questions. About my fears, my insecurities, my family. And all the while, he kept reminding me that he could make or break me. That he had friends in every corner of Hollywood. That if I ever spoke about that night, I'd regret it." Velasquez leaned closer. "Were there cameras, Mr. Carey?" "Yes," he said, almost in a whisper. "There was a mirror facing the tub. It looked like a normal wall-length mirror, but I later realized it was two-way glass. And in the reflection, just for a moment, I saw the outline of a red recording light." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Harper banged her gavel sharply. "Order. I will have silence in this courtroom." Velasquez continued. "Why did you stay silent for so long?" Carey's face seemed to fold in on itself. "Because I was ashamed. Because I convinced myself it didn't mean anything. Because after that night, roles started coming my way. Offers I hadn't gotten before. I told myself it was a coincidence, but I knew better. And the few times I even considered telling someone, I'd get messages. Reminders. Like clockwork." "What kind of messages?" "An envelope delivered to my trailer with a still image of that room. Or a letter that just said, 'You looked comfortable.' That sort of thing. Enough to make you paranoid. Enough to keep you silent." Velasquez turned to the jury again, slowly. "Did Mr. Combs ever use your silence against you, Mr. Carey?" "Yes. Years later, when I started speaking out about industry corruption in general, I got a phone call. A blocked number. The voice said, 'We have your tub scene. Maybe you should stick to comedy.' That's when I realized it wasn't just Diddy. It was a network. A protection circle." The courtroom was no longer simply listening. They were watching a man dissect his own career in real time. Velasquez asked her final question of the segment. "Why are you coming forward now?" Carey didn't hesitate. "Because people are finally listening. Because too many others have come forward and been silenced or destroyed. Because I'm not the only one. and because I'm not afraid anymore." With that, Velasquez stepped back, and silence returned. Judge Harper announced a recess. The jury was let out. Reporters scrambled toward the hallway, phones buzzing in their hands. But no one left without a lingering glance at CAREY, who remained on the stand for a few minutes more, sitting alone, looking at the floor. Not as a star, not as a clown, but as a man who had, for the first time in decades, told the truth. As the courtroom reconvened after a short recess, the air inside seemed heavier. The silence before the next testimony was thick, pulsing with the unspoken realization that what had just occurred, Jim Carrey's confession, was more than testimony. It was a trigger, a catalyst that had blown the gates open for everything that would follow. Courtroom clerks avoided eye contact. A few jury members looked visibly shaken. The judge, normally composed to a fault, adjusted her glasses twice in under a minute. But no one anticipated what came next. The door at the rear of the courtroom opened again, this time revealing a different kind of figure, Meek Mill. The rapper, wearing a gray tailored suit that contrasted sharply with his usual public image, strode into the courtroom surrounded by federal marshals. His walk wasn't swagger, it was survival. He looked like a man who had run out of escapes. The judge looked up, surprised. This was an unscheduled witness, and she turned sharply toward the prosecution table. Assistant U.S. Attorney Dana Velasquez stood. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, we are calling a surprise witness. Mr. Robert Williams, known publicly as Meek Mill, has voluntarily requested to testify. We believe his testimony directly relates to evidence presented earlier today." Judge Harper's eyebrows lifted, but she nodded. "Very well. Let the record show this is an unscheduled witness. Bailiff, please swear in the witness." Meek Mill raised his right hand, his lips trembling slightly as he took the oath. "I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God." Velasquez didn't wait. She approached quickly, her tone brisk but measured. "Mr. Williams, when did you first meet Sean Combs?" Meek Mill adjusted the microphone. "I met him officially in 2011. I had just started gaining traction on the East Coast. He came to one of my shows in Philly and had one of his people reach out. At first, I thought it was a business thing. He said he could help me get past the mixtape ceiling. Said he'd connect me with people who could put me on the level of a Jay-Z or Kanye." Velasquez nodded. "And did he follow through?" "He followed through all right," Meek Mill said grimly. "But not the way I thought. First few weeks, yeah, it was just networking. Clubs, dinners, red carpets. Then he started inviting me to these after-parties. Always at some rented mansion or high-rise suite. Always super exclusive. People you wouldn't expect to see in the same room were all there, rappers, actors, billionaires, politicians. And what happened at these after-parties? They were controlled," Meek said. "It wasn't like regular parties. There were cameras in every corner, but they were hidden. I found one once behind a smoke detector, another inside a speaker grill. The guests didn't know, or if they did, they acted like they didn't. Everything felt curated, like the whole event was a setup for something." Velasquez glanced at the jury before asking, "A setup for what?" "Blackmail," Meek replied without blinking. Diddy never said it directly, but you could feel it. People would get encouraged to do wild stuff. Drugs, sex, things they'd never normally do. Then a week later, someone would mention seeing a video, or you'd get a text with a blurry photo attached. One time, I got a USB drive in a sealed envelope. It was footage of me passed out in a room with 2 women and a tray full of pills. The jury collectively leaned forward. "And who sent it to you?" Meek's jaw tensed. "Nobody signed it. But the next day, Diddy called and said, 'I told you I look out for my people. Now you're protected.' That was his code. Protected meant you were owned." Velasquez walked slowly toward the defense table, then turned back. "Mr. Williams, can you tell the court about the night you were in the same room as Jim Carrey?" A hush swept through the room. Meek nodded slowly. "Yeah, it was in 2015. I got a call from one of Diddy's assistants telling me I needed to be at this penthouse party. Said it was important for career realignment. That was the word, realignment. When I got there, it was low-lit, private, very few people. Jim Carrey was there, but he didn't look happy. He was sitting off to the side, drinking water, looking like he wanted to disappear. Did you speak with him?" "No. But Diddy made a show of saying, 'Meek, you and Jim should connect.' He was always trying to force these awkward introductions. It wasn't about chemistry. It was about control. Did anything happen that night?" Meek paused. "I left early. I felt weird, like I was being watched. When I tried to leave, One of the security guys tried to stop me. Said, Mr. Combs prefers guests to stay the whole night. I told him I wasn't comfortable and that I had a family emergency. He let me go, but on the way out, I saw a wall of monitors in a back room. Dozens of camera feeds. Every room, every angle. People were being filmed without knowing. And was Jim Carrey on one of those monitors? Yes, Meek said, his voice nearly cracking. I saw him in a bathroom talking to someone. Looked like they were arguing. It wasn't an act. I saw real fear in his face. The room was deathly silent. Velasquez pressed on. Mr. Williams, did you ever attempt to leave Mr. Combs's network? I tried in 2018. I started distancing myself. Stopped replying to messages. Changed my number. But it didn't matter. A week later, a clip from one of those parties leaked to a blog. It showed me in a room with people doing lines of coke. It almost killed my career. Diddy called me that same night and said, "You're either inside or outside. If you're outside, you're vulnerable." I knew then that he'd ruin me if I ever spoke up. Why speak up now? Meek looked down, then up again. Because the truth matters. Because too many people are scared to talk. Because I saw what he did to Cassie. Because if we don't bring this all into the light, it's just going to keep happening. And maybe by telling the truth, I can finally breathe again. Velasquez nodded. No further questions. The judge leaned forward. Defense, would you like to cross-examine? Diddy's lead attorney stood, a tall man in an immaculate navy suit. Not at this time, Your Honor. That answer spoke volumes. Judge Harper dismissed the witness. Meek Mill stepped down, walking slowly, his head high despite the weight that had clearly pressed on him for years. In the gallery, murmurs began to ripple through the rows like tremors before an earthquake. Everyone could feel it now. This wasn't just a celebrity scandal. It wasn't just another tabloid trial. It was a reckoning. Meek Mill's testimony had confirmed what CAREY had suggested. This wasn't isolated behavior. This was systemic, calculated, and deliberate. A ring of influence, money, manipulation, and silence, wrapped in fame and protected by fear. The walls were crumbling. Reporters scrambled to update their feeds. Newsrooms across the country began preparing for emergency broadcasts. Hashtags exploded on social media. And in the hallways outside the courtroom, other names were already being whispered. The courtroom had become a crucible, where secrets melted into truth under the relentless heat of testimony. Meek Mill's bombshell revelations added weight to the already suffocating atmosphere, and the audience, transfixed, knew that what came next could either unravel everything or snap the fragile tension into 1,000 irreparable pieces. The murmurs hadn't faded when the prosecution requested their next witness. All rise, the bailiff bellowed, but this time, people stood in anticipation rather than out of formality. They sensed this wasn't just another day in court. Something bigger was unraveling right before them. Dana Velasquez addressed the judge. Your Honor, the prosecution now calls Detective Leanne Ortega to the stand. The double doors open once again, revealing a tall, sharp-eyed woman in her late 40s wearing a dark blazer and pressed slacks. Unlike the celebrities before her, Ortega exuded quiet command, the kind of authority earned not from fame but from grit. The hush in the room shifted to one of cautious reverence. This woman wasn't here to speculate or perform. She was here to deliver facts. After being sworn in, Ortega sat, adjusted the microphone, and waited. Velasquez approached. Detective Ortega, please state your occupation and involvement with the investigation at hand. I am a senior detective with the Special Investigations Division of the LAPD. I was assigned as lead investigator in a joint operation involving the FBI and local law enforcement, focused on the suspected exploitation, blackmail, and coercion network tied to Sean Combs. And when did this investigation begin? Unofficially, murmurs and concerns were circulating as early as 2014. But the task force was formally initiated in March 2021 after multiple women came forward with overlapping claims. The stories were too consistent and too disturbing to ignore. What specifically prompted the task force to treat this as more than isolated incidents? Ortega looked directly at the jury. Patterns. We saw the same architecture in every testimony. Lavish parties. Heavy drug use. Hidden cameras. Guests being encouraged, sometimes coerced, to indulge in behavior they wouldn't normally engage in. Then, shortly after, a clear shift in power dynamics. The guests became tools. They were silenced, threatened, or pulled deeper into the operation through manipulation or blackmail. Velasquez stepped closer. Did your team uncover physical evidence of these operations? Yes, Ortega said, reaching for a manila folder placed on the witness stand. With assistance from federal cybercrime units, we recovered multiple hard drives and encrypted servers from 3 properties owned or rented by Mr. Combs between 2015 and 2022. These drives contain surveillance footage from dozens of events. The footage was uncut, showing everything from party entrances to private bedroom encounters. The audience collectively inhaled. Even the defense team seemed momentarily paralyzed. Are any of these recordings relevant to the testimony provided by Jim Carrey or Meek Mill? Yes. We reviewed footage dated July 2015, matching the timeline Meek Mill described. In the video, Mr. Carrey is shown arguing with a man later identified as a security contractor for Mr. Combs. Carrey's body language was defensive. Audio from the clip, enhanced by our forensics team, suggested that he was being threatened. The phrase, "You know the cost of walking out," was repeated 3 times by the other party. And did Mr. Carrey leave? Ortega nodded grimly. Yes, he eventually left after approximately 15 minutes of the confrontation. But that same evening, a separate clip shows 2 men accessing a hidden camera hub located in a back room. They appeared to copy footage onto a USB drive. We have reason to believe this footage was later used as leverage. The judge leaned in. Detective Ortega, to be clear, are you stating that these recordings were made without consent? Yes, Your Honor. We found no documentation, no waivers, no notifications that any guests were aware they were being recorded. Many of the setups were hidden within smoke detectors, recessed lighting, even behind mounted artwork. This was a covert surveillance network designed with precision. Velasquez let the silence sink in before asking, was there any indication that these materials were distributed or sold? Ortega hesitated. While we did not find evidence of public distribution, we discovered encrypted email threads and file transfer logs suggesting that selected clips were shared with specific individuals. These recipients were primarily high-profile figures in the entertainment and business sectors. Our theory is that these exchanges functioned as a kind of unspoken pact, mutual destruction insurance. Everyone had dirt on everyone else. The court erupted into low, horrified murmurs. Your Honor, Velasquez said, we'd like to submit into evidence a summary of the forensic findings from those drives, including a list of recovered file names and metadata indicating time and location of each recording. Admitted, Judge Harper said with steel in her voice. Velasquez returned to the center of the courtroom. Detective Ortega, did any of the recovered data reference other celebrities connected to these incidents? Yes. Several folders were labeled with nicknames, initials, or dates linked to well-known individuals. We found references to Queen Bee, WS, MK, and Drake's. Some of these match known aliases or abbreviations used within Mr. Combs' social circle. Was the term Queen Bee linked to Beyoncé Knowles Carter? Yes, based on timestamps and event details, including a party at a property in Bel Air in 2018, where she and other high-profile figures were present. Footage associated with that folder is under federal seal due to its sensitive nature. The room seemed to freeze. Every head turned toward the defense table, but Diddy sat motionless, his expression unreadable behind designer glasses. Yet it was clear to everyone. He knew exactly what was being unearthed. Velasquez leaned forward. Detective Ortega, did your investigation find any indication that individuals were trafficked or manipulated under threat to remain silent? Yes. Several victims described being flown to events under false pretenses, sometimes without knowing who would be present or where they would end up. One victim, under pseudonym Ray, testified in a sealed deposition that she was flown to an island property in 2019. Her phone was confiscated upon arrival. She claimed she witnessed several altercations, including one involving a male artist being physically restrained after trying to leave. Were these events documented? Yes. GPS tracking from confiscated phones aligned with flight manifests and security logs from those properties. Surveillance footage corroborated her presence. A clip showed her seated beside a visibly intoxicated man later confirmed to be a Grammy-winning rapper. She claimed she was told to keep him calm or she'd be deported. The gravity of Ortega's testimony settled like a blanket over the room. This was no longer about parties gone wrong or celebrities behaving badly. This was industrialized exploitation, carefully organized, thoroughly concealed. Velasquez gave one final question. Detective Ortega, based on all your findings, how would you characterize the nature of this operation? Ortega didn't blink. It was a coercive enterprise designed to accumulate leverage, silence dissent, and manufacture loyalty through fear. Mr. Combs used fame not as a platform, but as a weapon. Velasquez nodded. No further questions, Your Honor. The judge looked to the defense team. This time they stood. We reserve our cross-examination for a later session. Detective Ortega stepped down and walked past the gallery without glancing at a single face. She didn't need to. Her words had landed like a thunderclap. As the next recess was called, the courtroom buzzed with disbelief. Outside, media vans clustered tighter than ever. Inside, jurors sat pale, shifting in their chairs as though unsure if what they'd heard had truly happened in the real world or was part of some dystopian film. But there was no mistaking it now. What had once been whispered rumors about puffy parties and unspoken celebrity codes was now a detailed, documented, forensic reality. And it was only the beginning. The tension was no longer just palpable, it was suffocating. The air inside the courtroom felt heavier, and for the jurors, it was as if they were slowly being submerged in a sea of revelations that no amount of preparation could have braced them for. Each witness brought forward not just testimony, but a wave of emotional reckoning. With Detective Ortega's damning account still echoing in everyone's minds, the question on everyone's lips was, who would dare step forward next? The answer came swiftly. Dana Velasquez stood once again. Her tone was composed, but her eyes carried the weight of what she was about to reveal. Your Honor, the prosecution calls to the stand former Bad Boy Records producer and longtime industry insider, Anthony "Tone" Wycliffe. The double doors swung open slowly this time. A man in his mid-50s walked in with a purposeful gait. He wore a dark turtleneck under a weathered trench coat, his salt and pepper hair cropped short, eyes hidden behind thick-rimmed glasses. To those in the music industry, Wycliffe was a behind-the-scenes legend. He had worked with some of the biggest names in hip-hop and R&B for over 2 decades, crafting sounds that defined generations. But what most didn't know, until now, was that he had also been harboring a knowledge of the inner workings of Diddy's empire that no one else dared to voice. After being sworn in, Wycliffe took his seat and leaned forward. Mr. Wycliffe, Velasquez began. How long did you work under the employment or contractual arrangement of Sean Combs? I first met Diddy in '95, when he was building Bad Boy from the ground up. I was one of the in-house producers. Stayed on for more than 15 years. Off and on after that. Would you describe your relationship with Mr. Combs as professional, personal, or both? He gave a half-shrug. Started out strictly business. But in that world, business and personal blur real quick. You get close. Or you pretend to. That's the only way to survive. During your time with Mr. Combs, were you aware of events or behaviors that, in retrospect, appear criminal or coercive? The courtroom leaned forward. Yes, Wycliffe said without hesitation. But at the time, it didn't feel like it. That's the thing with power. When someone like Diddy walks into a room, people change. Rules bend. What might be criminal outside the gates of his mansion felt normal once you were inside. Velasquez let that hang before continuing. Can you provide examples? Wycliffe exhaled slowly. There were parties. Not the kind the public saw in magazines. I'm talking about controlled environments. Invite only, phones locked in safes, security at every door. You'd walk in, and everything was perfect. Expensive alcohol, the best DJs, celebrity guests. But then you'd notice the surveillance. Cameras in corners. Some obvious, some not. You'd hear whispers about rooms upstairs and private screenings. And if you got too close or asked too many questions, you were either pushed out or pulled in. What do you mean by pulled in? Let's say you're a new artist, hungry for success. You get invited to a gathering with big names. You're offered a drink, maybe something stronger. Then someone tells you to loosen up, enjoy the night. Next thing you know, you wake up in a room you don't recognize. Maybe you're alone. Maybe you're not. But there's always a knock at your door before you leave. Someone tells you what you did, what you said, what you let happen, and they smile while they say it. The silence in the courtroom grew colder. And if that person refused to comply? Velasquez asked. They'd disappear, Wycliffe said. Not physically, but from the industry. Studio sessions dried up. Features got pulled. You'd start hearing stories, drug use, erratic behavior, unreliable artist. Your name was dead before your album dropped. Velasquez's expression sharpened. Were you ever aware of blackmail material being used? Yes, Wycliffe said with conviction. It was an unspoken weapon. I remember one night in 2009 at a house in the Hollywood Hills. There was a young artist, talented kid, barely 22. He got invited to one of these gatherings. After the party, I overheard Diddy talking to someone about the footage they got. He laughed and said, "Now he's ours." Did you ever confront him? Wycliffe let out a humorless laugh. You don't confront Diddy. You make a choice. Play along or pack your bags. Velasquez nodded. Did you ever witness any interactions between Mr. Combs and celebrities who have testified in this trial, such as Jim Carrey or Meek Mill? Yes. I remember Jim showing up to an event around 2015. He was different, didn't drink, stayed on the edge of the crowd. I caught him standing outside alone, talking on the phone. A few hours later, I saw two of Diddy's guys surrounding him. They weren't loud, but their body language was aggressive. That night, CAREY left early. The next day, Diddy was furious. He kept saying he saw too much. And Meek Mill? Same vibe. Meek came through during his early breakout days. I saw him arguing with someone in the studio one night. He wanted to pull out of a party. Said it didn't feel right. Diddy walked in, smiled, and wrapped his arm around him. Told him to relax. That's how it always started. A smile, a drink, and a door closing behind you. Velasquez glanced at the jury, whose expressions ranged from horrified to stunned. She turned back to Wycliffe. Why are you speaking out now? He hesitated only briefly. Because for years, I told myself I was just the music guy, that I didn't know enough to stop it. But that's not true. I saw it. I enabled it by staying silent. And after Cassie came forward, after these young artists disappeared from the scene or fell apart, I couldn't keep pretending. Velasquez gave him a nod of acknowledgement. No further questions, Your Honor. The defense rose. Their lead attorney, Malcolm Royce, walked toward Wycliffe with slow deliberation. Mr. Wycliffe, let me ask you something. You say you worked with Mr. Combs for 15 years. In all that time, you never once went to the police. No, Wycliffe replied plainly. Why not? Because I was afraid. Afraid of what? You're a grown man, successful, respected. Why fear someone like Mr. Combs? Wycliffe leaned forward. Because Diddy doesn't just end your career. He buries your legacy. He makes sure your name is never mentioned again unless it's a punchline. And in this business, that's death. Royce smirked. Isn't it true that you left Bad Boy Records in 2010 after a financial dispute? I left because I stopped believing in what we were building. Or because you weren't being paid enough. I was being paid plenty, Wycliffe said evenly. What I wasn't getting was peace of mind. Royce paused. So you come here, 15 years later, and ask this jury to believe that you had no role in anything that happened? That you were just a witness? I'm not asking them to see me as innocent, Wycliffe replied. I'm asking them to understand that what happened was real, and that it didn't stop because no one said anything. It stopped because people finally did. The judge called for a recess, and as the jury filed out, more than a few wiped at their eyes. Outside, the media swarmed. Inside, the prosecution sat quietly, knowing the path ahead was still steep. But now they had laid down enough pieces of the puzzle that the full picture was becoming impossible to ignore. The empire Diddy had built wasn't just about music. It was a fortress built on control, through intimidation, silence, and calculated manipulation. And now, one by one, the bricks were being torn away. The courtroom reconvened after a tense recess. By now, every seat in the gallery was filled. Reporters scribbled frantically, typing lines that would soon explode across news feeds. The gallery buzzed with expectation as people whispered about Anthony Wycliffe's testimony. But the prosecution wasn't done. If anything, they had saved one of their most pivotal witnesses for this moment. Dana Velasquez rose again, composed, steady. The room quieted almost instantly. Your Honor, the prosecution calls Cassandra Ventura. The name struck the room like a sudden gust of cold air. Cassie. For years, she had been known simply as the beautiful, soft-spoken singer with the sultry voice and piercing eyes, who shared a highly publicized and often speculated upon relationship with Sean Combs. To some, she was a muse. To others, a mystery. But on this day, she was something much more, a survivor with a voice the world had tried to suppress. Cassie entered slowly, her face unreadable. There was a hush so deep it felt like a vacuum had pulled all the oxygen from the room. She wore no makeup. No glitz. Just a simple navy dress and a look that was not angry, but resolute. She didn't look at Diddy, who stared forward, arms crossed tightly against his chest. After being sworn in, Cassie took her seat and looked out across the courtroom. Velasquez stood only a few feet away. Ms. Ventura, thank you for being here today. Would you please tell the court how you first met Sean Combs? Cassie spoke softly, but her voice did not waver. I met him in 2005. I was 19. He was larger than life, charismatic, powerful. He told me I had it. And when someone like him tells you that, you believe it. I thought it was a dream. What kind of relationship did you develop with Mr. Combs? It started as professional, she said. Studio sessions, vocal coaching, then private dinners, then hotel rooms. Before long, I was in it. Not a business deal, a relationship. Would you characterize this relationship as consensual? Cassie's eyes flicked up for the first time, locking onto Velasquez's. No, not fully, not freely. He controlled everything, where I lived, what I wore, who I spoke to, even what I ate. I couldn't go anywhere without asking for permission. If I defied him, I was punished. Sometimes verbally, sometimes physically. The jury was still, many visibly shaken. Can you provide a specific instance? Cassie nodded slowly. In 2008, I told him I wanted to visit my family. He said no. I told him I needed a break. That night, he locked me in a hotel suite in Las Vegas. Took my phone. Security was posted outside the door. I wasn't allowed to leave for 3 days. He said I was being reprogrammed. He called it love. There was an audible gasp in the courtroom. Did you ever attempt to leave? Many times. But every time I did, he'd remind me of the things he had on me. Photos. Videos. He said he'd destroy me if I spoke. That no one would believe me. That he'd ruin my name in the industry. And he wasn't wrong. Ms. Ventura, during this relationship, did Mr. Combs ever involve you in activities or events you did not consent to? She hesitated. Yes. Please explain. There were parties, she said. Private, controlled events. The same kind Anthony Wycliffe described. Diddy would ask me to attend, to be presentable, to play nice. Sometimes, he'd offer me pills. Sometimes, I took them, just to numb it. Sometimes, there were men I didn't know, and I was told to be entertaining. Cameras were always rolling. Later, he'd remind me of the footage. Remind me how much I owed him. Velasquez paused, allowing the silence to deepen the impact. Were there other women subjected to similar treatment? Cassie's voice trembled slightly. Yes. Models. Assistants. Artists. Some stayed longer than me. Some vanished. Do you know where any of them are now? She shook her head. Some are overseas. Some disappeared from social media entirely. A few. I think they didn't survive it. The gallery was no longer just quiet. It was reverent. As if everyone understood this was no longer about celebrity gossip. This was a reckoning. Velasquez approached the next question with deliberate care. Ms. Ventura, what finally gave you the strength to speak out? I almost died, she said simply. In 2019, he snapped. I don't even remember what triggered it. Maybe I looked at someone too long. Maybe I answered him wrong. But he beat me. Bad. I was hospitalized with broken ribs and a concussion. And the next morning, he sent flowers. And I realized if I didn't leave, I'd die in that house. So I ran. The jury was visibly shaken. Some looked away. Others wiped tears. And what did Mr. Combs do? He tried to find me. Sent people to follow me. Hacked my emails. Threatened to release footage. But I stayed gone. Changed my number. Changed my life. Velasquez nodded. No further questions, Your Honor. Defense attorney Malcolm Royce stood, slowly making his way toward the witness. Ms. Ventura, he began, his voice carefully measured. You claim to have suffered a great deal during your time with Mr. Combs. Yet, you remained with him for nearly 15 years. Can you explain that? Cassie turned toward him. It's called trauma bonding. Look it up. A ripple of restrained emotion moved through the gallery. Royce didn't flinch. Isn't it true that during those years, you accepted expensive gifts, trips, and access to elite opportunities? Yes. And none of them were free. Could it not be said that you benefited from the association with Mr. Combs? Cassie's voice was calm. I survived it. That's the only benefit I got. Why wait until now to speak out? I waited because I was scared. Because every time I opened my mouth, he reminded me of what he could do. And you know what? He did it to others. I watched it happen. But then the others started speaking. And I realized I wasn't alone. Royce took a breath. Ms. Ventura, you settled a lawsuit against Mr. Combs not long ago. Confidential terms. Is it possible this testimony is part of a vendetta? an attempt to re-enter the spotlight. Cassie leaned in. You think I want to be here? Talking about being trapped? Being humiliated? You think I want to relive the worst years of my life on camera, in front of strangers? I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because I'm tired of pretending that silence equals healing. The judge called for a short recess, but the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted yet again. Cassie stood up slowly and exited without a glance in Diddy's direction. Outside, the world had already exploded with headlines. Inside, Diddy's expression had changed for the first time during the trial. He didn't look angry. He looked like a man who finally realized that the walls around him weren't as high or as thick as he once believed. After the emotionally harrowing testimony from Cassie Ventura, the courtroom took a brief recess. The crowd outside the courthouse had swelled. Media vans were parked in every available space within a 6-block radius, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like iron stalks. Protesters and supporters held signs, some demanding justice for the victims, others defending Sean Combs with slogans that spoke of loyalty and disbelief. Inside, however, there was a growing sense that the tide had turned. When court resumed, the prosecution wasn't slowing down. Dana Velasquez stood with quiet intensity, clearly aware that her next witness could either fortify the foundation of her case or unravel it. Your Honor, the prosecution calls Detective Marcus Brandt to the stand. The room stilled again. Marcus Brandt was the lead investigator assigned to the federal task force that had, over the course of 18 months, unraveled the murky web surrounding Sean Combs. His reputation was ironclad. In law enforcement circles, Brandt was known as a bloodhound, never flashy, never loud, but impossible to shake off once he had a scent. Brandt took the stand in a crisp gray suit, no badge visible, but the weight of authority surrounded him like an invisible shield. He was sworn in, then fixed his eyes on Velasquez. Detective Brandt, she began, can you please tell the court your role in this investigation? I'm part of the Organized Crime and Vice Division, Joint Task Force with the FBI. I was assigned as lead investigator on Operation Nightfall, a codename given to the ongoing investigation into a network of trafficking, coercion, and blackmail allegedly involving Mr. Sean Combs and his associates. What initiated Operation Nightfall? Initial red flags came in through financial audits and pattern behavior reports flagged by an AI system monitoring luxury property rentals and transportation bookings for suspected trafficking activity. That, combined with anonymous tips, including from a former employee of Combs Enterprises, led us to begin surveillance and financial forensics. Did your team uncover criminal activity during the course of this investigation? Brandt nodded. Yes. We discovered a multi-layered operation that extended beyond traditional trafficking. This included coerced sexual encounters recorded on hidden surveillance devices, encrypted financial transactions paying off multiple individuals to maintain silence, and logistical arrangements that suggested routine movement of unwilling participants across state lines. There was an audible shuffle in the courtroom as pens scratched furiously. Were there specific locations linked to these operations? Yes. 3 primary locations were used as operational bases, one in Los Angeles, one in Miami, and one in the Bahamas. Each location featured tight security, multiple surveillance systems, and private guest lists curated by Mr. Combs and his inner circle. These weren't parties. They were controlled environments. Surveillance footage confirmed that guests were often drugged, and that escorts were brought in through third-party handlers under assumed names. Was Cassie Ventura ever identified on those tapes? She was, along with no fewer than 12 other women who have since come forward to confirm they were not there by choice. What kind of surveillance did your team discover? Each of these homes had a series of micro-cameras hidden in mirrors, chandeliers, and ceiling corners. The video footage was stored off-site via encrypted VPN, which we traced to a cloud account under a shell corporation tied to Mr. Combs. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence as Brandt continued. Some of the video files had timestamps going back over 15 years. Did the footage corroborate any testimony already submitted in this trial? Yes. Cassie Ventura, Anthony Wycliffe, and 2 unnamed Jane Does all appeared in footage in compromising, disturbing, and evidently non-consensual situations. The footage is under seal but has been reviewed by the Department of Justice. Velasquez paused to let that sink in. Detective Brandt, did you find any evidence that suggests others in the entertainment industry were aware of these activities? Yes. In fact, some individuals appeared repeatedly at these gatherings, and their behavior indicated complicity. Some even participated in monitoring the cameras. One notable example was a recording where Will Smith is seen entering a private room, speaking directly into a camera, saying, "This is for the vault." That clip has since gone viral. Velasquez nodded grimly. Did your team determine whether these recordings were used for leverage or blackmail? Yes. We found multiple messages and emails, encrypted but decoded by our cybercrime team, referencing insurance, favor banks, and shelf files. Mr. Combs kept an archive of sensitive footage and documents. The suggestion was that these could be deployed to neutralize potential threats, either legal or reputational. What happened when you attempted to serve a search warrant on Combs's primary residence? Brandt's jaw tightened. We were met with resistance. Several hard drives had been wiped within minutes of our approach. A cleaning crew had been dispatched, anonymously, but we traced the payment back to a crypto wallet associated with Combs's former manager. We did, however, recover several encrypted drives that were hidden inside a false wall behind his home office. The data is still being analyzed. Were there efforts made to obstruct justice during this investigation? Yes. Witnesses were bribed. 2 were assaulted. 1, a former chauffeur, fled to Europe and applied for asylum after being threatened. Another, a female employee who handled guest lists, was hospitalized after a home invasion that bore the signs of a targeted hit. The room fell silent again. Has Mr. Combs been cooperative? No. He refused interviews, declined deposition, and his attorneys issued blanket denials. We had to subpoena every piece of evidence we now hold. He also filed lawsuits to prevent the release of specific documents, many of which failed under judicial review. Velasquez returned to her table, satisfied. No further questions. Malcolm Royce stood up, eyes locked on Brandt. Detective, you mentioned the name Will Smith. Are you suggesting that Mr. Combs had a blackmail operation against other celebrities? I'm not suggesting it. I'm confirming that the operation existed. Whether it was used against Will Smith specifically is part of an ongoing investigation. Isn't it possible that these recordings were simply for personal use? To document events? Brandt raised an eyebrow. Not when they're encrypted, stored off-site, and cataloged with tags like insurance_.us or silence_CAREY or Rihanna_compromise. These were not memories. These were weapons. Are you aware that my client has donated millions to civil rights causes, supported emerging artists, and received numerous humanitarian awards? Brandt didn't flinch. So did other men who abused their power. Philanthropy does not negate exploitation. The exchange was cold. Surgical. Royce tried again. Can you guarantee the integrity of the recovered footage? We had third-party validation through federal labs. Watermarks, timestamps, and metadata confirmed their authenticity. If there was fabrication, it would have taken an entire Hollywood-level post-production team working over a decade. Unlikely. No further questions. As Brandt stepped down, the courtroom exhaled. His testimony had been a sledgehammer, and while he never raised his voice, every word had landed with undeniable weight. Dana Velasquez looked around the courtroom. She knew they had built a near-bulletproof case, but she also knew what they were up against: a man with deep connections, endless money, and an army of high-profile defenders. Still, something had shifted. This wasn't just about Diddy anymore. It was about the system that protected him, the agents who looked the other way, the celebrities who played along, the music industry moguls who whispered, "That's just how it is," as young lies were funneled through the machinery of fame and fed into silence. Velasquez approached the bench, whispering something to the judge. He nodded, made a note, and addressed the court. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will adjourn for today. Court will reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp. Please remember not to discuss the case or consume media related to these proceedings." As everyone filed out, no one spoke. No one dared. The truth had finally pierced through the glitz and glamour, and now the courtroom, and the world, would never see Sean Combs the same way again. The following day, the courtroom was filled with an electricity that no camera could fully capture. It was the kind of tension that made people sit a little straighter, breathe a little quieter, and glance repeatedly at the heavy wooden doors that separated the world outside from the bombshells dropping inside. Journalists had arrived at dawn, their fingers hovering above keyboards, ready to transcribe every explosive word. Social media was already abuzz with speculation about who the next witness might be. Rumors had circulated all morning, but no one was ready for what would happen next. As the court came to order, Judge Warren McKinley cleared his throat and looked to the prosecution. Ms. Velasquez, you may proceed. Dana Velasquez stood with composure, but her eyes revealed that something significant was about to happen. Your Honor, the prosecution calls Jennifer Lopez to the stand. Gasps rippled through the courtroom like an earthquake. Even members of the defense team exchanged glances. Cameras, although barred from recording, flicked their red lights on in anticipation. This was no longer just a trial, it was history unfolding in real time. Jennifer Lopez entered from the witness hallway, dressed in a modest yet elegant black suit, minimal makeup, and no jewelry except for a simple silver cross. Her face was solemn, her eyes steeled with determination. As she was sworn in, the silence in the room became almost oppressive. Ms. Lopez, Velasquez began softly. Thank you for being here today. Can you tell the court how you came to know Mr. Sean Combs? Lopez inhaled slowly. We met in the late 1990s, during the height of both our careers. We dated for a time. He was charismatic, powerful, and connected. Everyone wanted to be in his orbit, including me. Can you describe your experience in that relationship? She paused, eyes darting momentarily to Combs, who sat stoically at the defense table, his jaw tight. At first, it was glamorous. Lavish parties, studio sessions, private jets. But the deeper I got, the more I realized that everything around him had a cost. Control, silence, obedience. There were rules that weren't spoken but understood. If you crossed a line, you paid. Did you ever witness or experience violence during your time with Mr. Combs? Her voice dropped a register. Yes, I saw him strike others. I saw him intimidate staff. And once, he grabbed me by the throat in a hotel room in Atlanta after I asked him why a girl had left his suite crying. The room tensed, everyone frozen by the gravity of her words. Did you report this? No. At the time, I believed no one would care. He was untouchable, and I was afraid that speaking up would ruin my career. Or worse, get someone I loved hurt. So I left quietly. Velasquez leaned in. But you're here today? What? Jennifer exhaled slowly. Because for years, I buried it. I tried to forget. But when I saw Cassie come forward, and then I saw those tapes being referenced in court, I knew I had to say something. I couldn't keep protecting someone just because the world treated him like a king. Especially not after what I know now. Were you aware of the surveillance footage operation mentioned in Detective Brandt's testimony? She nodded. Yes. I found out about it after we broke up. One of his former security guards called me anonymously and warned me that I might have been recorded. I never saw the footage, but I believed it. And I started putting the pieces together, the way certain celebrities never challenged him, how some lawsuits disappeared, how a lot of people were always scared around him. Did he ever threaten you directly? Yes. Once, after our breakup, I got a message through a mutual associate. It said, "Don't forget I know where all your skeletons are. Be a good girl and keep my name out of your mouth." I knew exactly what it meant. Were you ever forced to be around others in intimate situations, as previous witnesses described? Jennifer hesitated. There were times we were at his house or at events, and he'd suggest things. Push boundaries. I always said no, and he'd back off, but with this look that told me I wouldn't get another chance if I wanted to stay in his favor. I've seen girls taken into back rooms. I've seen them come out crying. I never knew the full story, but I knew it wasn't right. Velasquez allowed the silence to stretch. Ms. Lopez, what do you want from this testimony? Her answer was immediate. I want the truth to come out. And I want young women, especially those coming into this industry, to know that no amount of fame is worth your soul. I stayed quiet too long. I won't do it anymore. Thank you. No further questions. Malcolm Royce stood. His demeanor was calm, but his voice held an edge. Ms. Lopez, would you say your breakup with Mr. Combs was amicable? No. It was complicated. And since then, your careers have often run parallel. Do you harbor any resentment toward him? I don't. I've moved on. Built my own life. But that doesn't mean I forgot what happened. Is it possible that your testimony today is driven more by public momentum than personal truth? Jennifer's eyes flared with quiet anger. I'm here because I lived it. And you don't get to question that. Royce backed off, sensing the jury was not on his side. No further questions. As Lopez stepped down, the courtroom remained stunned. Not because they didn't believe her, but because she had done what so many in Hollywood had refused to do for decades: tell the truth about the darkness behind the limelight. The judge recessed the court for lunch, but no one truly left the moment behind. In the hallways, lawyers whispered feverishly. Reporters drafted headlines. And outside, the crowd had ballooned. Someone was blasting an old Puff Daddy track, but it had the bitter sting of irony. Inside, Dana Velasquez reviewed her notes. They were nearing the trial's crescendo. What began as a case against a music mogul was now something much larger. A reckoning for an entire culture that allowed power to operate without limits. The next witness would escalate things further. It wouldn't be a celebrity. It wouldn't be a detective. It would be a former enforcer, one of the men who worked security for Combs, who handled logistics, quieted victims, and cleaned up messes. But somewhere along the way, his conscience cracked. And now, he was ready to talk. As the court reconvened after the brief lunch recess, the air had shifted from stunned silence to anticipatory unease. The buzz of Jennifer Lopez's testimony was still reverberating through every corner of the building, the weight of her words casting a shadow on what was to come. But what no one fully expected.